let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for showing up this morning for another presentation as we work our way towards our strategic plan. We have with us our strategic plan facilitator, Thomas Watson from Rural Support Partners with us again today. And he'll frame up, the session and how it connects to the overall process. And then I'll introduce our presenter for today. So Thomas.
Hey, well, thank you so much, Michelle, and great to see everybody again. I hope it's as beautiful in Charleston as it is here in Nashville. Another gorgeous day for us. I'm going to be very quick here because I want to get to Matt. He's got all the information that we want to talk about, but I wanted to just make sure we're all on the same page about how this meeting fits into the larger strategic planning process. And as you know, this phase of the strategic planning process is gathering information from your stakeholders and really looking at data and information that's going to inform and help us to make good decisions for the future work of the foundation itself. We've had two of these meetings. On October 4th, we had a meeting on the grantee perception survey. That was all about the foundation. That meeting was all about data and information, really pointed inward about what's working with the foundation, how your grantees think about the foundation and areas you might improve. Today's meeting is all about looking out. Today's meeting is all about looking at the people, the places, and the issues that the foundation cares about, and what's happened between the last time we did the strategic plan and what the world looks like now. And so this is the community level indicators report. And then all of this information will be brought back to the strategic planning retreat, which is on November 4th and 5th. What we're trying to do this morning is to turn this information that you're going to hear from Midwest Evaluation into an analysis that will actually help to feed the strategic planning process, so that when we get to the retreat on November 4th, we'll actually start with analysis and not have to do that part, right? We'll be able to really build out and really begin to cue this, how this information actually informs the future of the foundation itself. And so as you listen to the information today, what I want y'all to do is to take the information and really turn it into an analysis that's going to help the foundation make good decisions, help y'all make good decisions about the foundation itself. And in order to do that, I got 4 questions for you. So as you listen to the information that's being presented, you're going to have a worksheet. And Catherine, if you could put that in the chat right now, this is a Google Doc. And as it goes into the chat, if you'll push the link there, hit the link, you'll see that the worksheet come up. And what I'm going to ask you, there's 4 questions on that worksheet. The first one, as you look at all this data that's coming out of Midwest Evaluation, I want you to think about what progress is being made on the issues or the people and places that the foundation cares about. Right? So you're going to see a lot of data for where we are, where were we several years ago, where are we now, what big progress is being made. So capture that one for me. And really think about the top 3. We don't want everything, we want the main sort of, chunks, big pieces of meat there. The second question is, what opportunities do you see to advance or deepen the impact of the foundation? Because you're going to see some areas here that we might be able to build on. You're going to see some areas that we might need to pay more attention to. So where are those opportunities to actually advance the impact of the foundation as we move forward over the next few years? And then number 3, on the flip side of that coin, is what external challenges could undermine the future impact of the foundation? And again, you're looking outwardly, not inwardly, but outwardly at some of the challenges that exist in the people, places, issues you care about. What are some of those things that could actually hold us back? Those are things we want to be mindful of and begin to think about how to move around over the next few years. And then the last question is, what big questions does this report bring up for you about your future efforts, right? There's just going to be some big things that pop up, is my guess, because there's a lot of great information in this report. So as you're listening to the report, be thinking about these questions and go ahead and put your input into the document. You'll be able to see everybody else's input. This is a Google Doc, so you'll see what pops up with everybody else. And then as we finish this up, you can actually hold on to the document if you want to, and even input some information after this meeting. If you'd like to take notes and then put it in later, it's fine. We will, as RSP, then turn all of this information and the information we got out of the first meeting into usable analysis that will literally focus the first day of our retreat on November 4th. So let me stop there and see if you have any questions. Make sure everybody got a hold of the link that's in the chat there. All right, pretty straightforward process. With that, Michelle, I'll turn it back to you, and we'll get the meeting started. Thank y'all.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. So today we have Matt Shepard with us. Matt's company, Midwest Evaluation and Research, has been providing us with impact measurement support for a number of years now, probably about 4 or 5 years. And he and his team also provide evaluation support to our grantees, direct evaluation coaching as well. He has an extensive history in evaluation, working with large nonprofits with federal grants, and to small and medium-sized groups like us. So I'll turn the conversation over to him. He's got the mic. Welcome, Matt, and your team.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll just say CJ, Shahana Johnson is my colleague here on this call, and it has had an important role in this. So if I mess something up, I encourage her to speak in quickly. But I also will say, you may notice I'm kind of in a hotel room. So when I start sharing my screen, I won't be able to see all of your faces. And so if you have a question, and I encourage you to just interrupt me, just speak up, don't raise your hand or hit something, because I probably won't see that, and I'll just keep going. So I'm going to try and make this as interactive as possible, and I encourage you, if you have questions about anything as we're going through it, to ask those questions, or when we get to kind of the discussion, we can have that as well. So I'm going to try to leave as much time for a discussion as we can have about this, because I think that's where the real value will come from this. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at the summary report that was shared. This right here, the Understanding Our Impact Community Level Dashboard Report. And so this is a summary of a much larger report that has 58 some odd indicators in it, that can be kind of overwhelming. And I think, as Thomas said, we really want to focus on the big chunks of meat and not get lost in the weeds here. And so I've tried to keep it as high level as possible when we go through this. I think a couple of things that are important to keep in mind as we talk about the indicators here. Number one is that realize that all of these indicators exist within a context, right? And so as a metaphor, you can think about riding a bike, right? And so riding a bike in Kansas is very different than riding a bike in the Rockies, right? So you may go up or downhill fighting slopes. You may have wind that blows you right to the left, to the front, to the back. And sometimes it's hard to make progress, and sometimes it's easy to make progress. And so that is the same with all of the indicators that we care about, that relate to kind of the well-being of the people in our communities. And some of the big ones that I just wanted to highlight, obviously COVID-19 is a big impact this year. And unfortunately, I think West Virginia and your 6-county area is probably going to see a bigger impact in 2021 than it did in 2020. So you can expect that a lot of the indicators that we're going to be looking at will actually be worse next year before they're going to get better. So that's going to be an ongoing impact. You're going to notice that obviously opioid addiction is a big issue in your community, and that's pretty visible in some of the things that we're going to be talking about. And then something that kind of interrelates with a lot of things that are not talked about here. So, the 80% decline in coal jobs over the last 30 years, your history with your education system, just general poverty issues, all kind of relate into this larger issue of what I call exit migration. So I don't have the particular charts in this summary report, but the general finding is that you lose a lot of the population in that working aged range, kind of the 25-year-olds to 44-year-olds tend to move out of the area, and they tend to move out of the area at a higher rate correlated with their education. So the more education they have, the more likely they're to move out of the area. And so that kind of getting your education and moving out of the state has an impact on a lot of the things that we're going to be looking at. So keep that in mind. And we don't try not to get lost in the weeds. So then when it comes to the methodology, I'll just say a few points here as well. Again, the indicators that we're going to be talking about today were developed, or I guess highlighted, based on the organizational logic model that we helped you with a few years ago. So based on that organizational logic model, we worked with the staff to develop some indicators that we thought were good proxies. And often what we mean by proxies is that we can't always directly measure the thing that we want to measure. And so sometimes we have to get a measurement that kind of talks about the issue that we care about, because there's not a good measure of that specific issue. And so, for example, we have a measure of broadband access, right? And so broadband access is a proxy for the number of people who actually have broadband. And so broadband access is limited by not only the geographic area and the service providers, but it can be impacted, as you would probably know better than anybody, by, which side of the mountain are you on in that service area? Or can you afford high-speed internet? And so lots of other kinds of things are involved in that. So this report relies exclusively on third-party data sources. And so what that means is we didn't go out and collect any information directly. We collected and aggregated information that was provided by other sources already, that includes like the United States Census Bureau and the Centers for Disease Control. And also we have borrowed heavily from other reports that do a similar thing, but not focused on the issues that we care about. So Robert Wood Johnson has their county level report that they do. Kids counts and other people do those kinds of things. And so we have taken from that the indicators that we feel are the best match for this report. And it's not always the best indicator. So for example, we may care more about the number of people who have a degree from college, rather than the number of people who have attended some level of post-secondary education. But there are not county level data available to us for the number of people who have graduated with a diploma of some kind from a post-secondary degree. So we have to take the proxy for that, which is, the number of people who have been involved in post-secondary education of some kind. So that is another, just note that sometimes this data can be a little bit inexact. So I just wanted to remember that we're fighting the crosswinds and that the data is not exact. And so what's really important here is the trends over time. The trends both in terms of how are you doing in terms of your 6-county catchment area, and in particular counties themselves, as compared to West Virginia overall, as compared to the national averages. And so those things tend to be pretty reliable, even if the exact number in some of those indicators are not. So having said that, I'm going to dive right into 3 major areas where I want to talk about some of the indicators in this report. The first one is education. And so in general, in education, you're doing really well. In fact, the 6-county area is overall doing better than the state in terms of at least its rate of improvement, and it's doing better than the national averages in general. So this is really a strength area of where you guys are making some progress. And so here are some charts that kind of talk about that. You can see pretty clearly, the improvements that have taken place in your 6-county area. That's the blue bar from, 2013 to 2020. You've seen about a 15 or 20% increase in high school graduation rates from those people who are in 9th grade. You've actually surpassed the national average, and you're improving more quickly than the state average as well. And so you've closed that gap with the state. So you guys are making really great progress in terms of the percentage of 9th graders who finish high school in 4 years. Not every county is the same. Clay County has had some fluctuations, but it still outperforms the national averages. This is a chart that shows the percentage of adults with some level of post-secondary education. And so you can see there's been improvements. There have not been huge improvements, but the trend is going up in this area. You are making progress, and you're actually making progress better than the state. You'll also notice, and I don't have a really good explanation for this, and this is, again, the nature of some of the data that we pull from sources. There's a big jump in the national data here between 2017 and 2018. My guess about that, we have tried to track down exactly why that jump has occurred in the data, but we followed it back as far as we could at the moment, and they didn't provide any explanation about why those numbers shifted. But my anticipation is that it probably has something to do with WIOA, and that they probably changed their definition of post-secondary education to include things like apprenticeships and credentials, which occurred about that same time frame. So there may have been a change in how the national reporting took place, which would mean probably in the next couple of years, there might be some changes in the way that the state tracks that data, or that is tracked on a local level. And so we might see changes in that as well. But in general, the real main theme here is, I think, is this upward trend in the level of post-secondary education. But I think that this effect is somewhat muted because it's not a tremendous impact. It's kind of a flat line almost by the number of people who obtain post-secondary education and then move probably out of the area. And so that's suppressing that indicator. It's also noteworthy here, as you can see, that in Clay County is about half the rate of the national average. So only about 31% of individuals between the ages of 25 and 44 in Clay County have some level of post-secondary education as compared to about 65% of the national average. So that's a real point. Then broadband access. Again, this is one of the ways, particularly in rural communities, where you have access to a lot of the information that's out there in the world. And so it's important for educational stuff. It's important for teachers. It's important for businesses to have this kind of access. And that has really shown some dramatic improvements as well. You're doing a great job here, and you've really closed the gap with the national averages, and you've actually extended your lead slightly over the state. So this is another area where we have about 90% of the people in your 6-county area have some access, again, not necessary utilization, but have at least some access to broadband. Again, there are some discrepancies there when we start to break things down to the county level. And Clay County, as in you will notice in many of these indicators, kind of is at the bottom end of this ranking. They're dramatically lower and only had about 28% of their residents having the access to broadband. So overall, yeah, you know, you guys are doing really well in this level of indicators. Things are improving, and if you've been, I think, contributing to that, you can take some pride in kind of that achievement, I think. Maybe I'll pause for a breath and see if anybody has any questions. And again, I can't see your faces, so if you do have questions about any of that, just kind of unmute yourself and ask. Okay, we'll move on to the health outcomes here. And so when it comes to health outcomes, it was more of a mixed bag. Some things improved or kind of were stagnant, and some of the things that are really important got worse. Again, I would caution you here that probably these indicators, as bad as they are, will probably be worse next year. And so there's probably going to be a lot of need in this area in general. And so we looked at 4 or 5 different indicators related to health. I'll skip right down to those right now. The first one being access to care, and as an indicator of that, the number or percentage of uninsured children in the area. And so you are actually doing really well in this particular indicator. This graph is a little more dramatic because it's only been about a 2% decline, but you actually have had a pretty good decline in the number of uninsured children in the area. I know there were some big policy changes around, you know, Obamacare and expansion of Medicaid early on. I think it may have taken a few years for those things to actually get implemented because there was like a 2-year delay in the onset of those rules before you saw a dramatic drop. I do think it's important to note that for some reason, things have gotten slightly worse here in 2020, that the state has taken a good full percentage jump, and there's been a slight uptick in uninsured children in your 6-county catchment area as well. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that trend might continue into next year. I'm not exactly sure the cause of that, but I'm no doubt it's related to access to you know, enrollment and COVID and all the other things that kind of interplay with those factors. I think the real jaw dropper probably in a lot of this is around kind of just premature deaths and mortality. And so there's not much more of a raw indicator than premature deaths, which is an indication of the potential lost life of people before the age of 75. And so if you're in that working age, and this is how the government defines it, not me, but if you're supposedly in kind of that working age range, you know, we don't want our citizens dying before they stop contributing to the workforce or not. And so this measures the number of people, the percentage of people per 100,000 who die prematurely. And so while there have been some fluctuations, as you can see, in the national averages, and that is probably going to spike up again next year, West Virginia has always been not as well off in that, had higher premature deaths than the national rate, but there's been a dramatic climb in that in the last 2 or 3 years. And so I would expect, again, that number to probably spike considerably in 2021 data when that comes out. And again, not all counties here are created equal. And actually, Lincoln County had the greatest number of years of potential lost life at about 14,300 years of lost life because of, so it's not equal. Lincoln and Clay, as you will notice, tend to be at the bottom two of all the counties in all these rankings of one kind or another. And then I don't think this is going to surprise anyone, but again, this is probably one of the most disheartening graphs that we have in this presentation, and that really is drug poisonings or overdose deaths. And that, again, that and COVID both contribute to premature mortality. And as you can see, there's just been a steady increase in the number of overdose deaths from basically 2014 all the way to 2020. The national average went up, as you can see, in 2020, but that is almost all COVID related. And I don't think the COVID related deaths really hit you guys yet. And so I think those numbers are going to be spiking next year due to that. But you can assume that due to your opioid crisis, that this number is on a steady increase and isn't yet to even slow down, I think, its arc. And so next year we could see some real substantial increases in that. And as is the case in many of these things are not evenly distributed over the communities that you care about. The highest rate of drug overdose deaths was in Boone County, but Kanawha and Lincoln both had pretty high rates as well. And so it's a pretty widespread problem that you guys are experiencing, as you know better than I. Not only, so another indicator that we looked at was really access to exercise, because that's an important part of health. And so in general, this has been really, really flat. As you can see, there hasn't been any substantial change over time. It's fluctuated up and down slightly, both for West Virginia overall and for your 6-county area, but you're holding pretty steady right at about 60%. The national average, again, spiked, and again, we can't really tell you at this moment why there was a dramatic increase. It probably had to do with some definitional change and how the feds reported that, but that indicator has not really moved at all. So it's been kind of a sluggish indicator, I would say. And then finally, a measurement of food insecurity. So this is about what percentage of the population lacks access to consistently good quality food to contribute to a balanced meal. So it's correlates with the idea of food deserts, it correlates with the idea of hunger, and it correlates with the idea that, cheap, unhealthy food is easy to get, healthy food is hard to get. And again, that relates back to some of your premature deaths, a lot of the health issues that you tend to experience in the community. So again, the news here isn't great. In particular, it's been really flat, but it is moving in the opposite direction when you consider the national averages. So the national averages, the red bar for food insecurity, have been dropping steadily since 2013. And so West Virginia has been up and down a bit, and your 6-county catchment area has been pretty much steady right at about 14% the entire time. So not a lot of change. Again, that's been probably an area that's resistive to your efforts in those areas. The counties with the highest rates of food insecurity were Clay County and Lincoln County. So again, not terribly surprising. So overall, I think these indicators present kind of a finding that there's a lot of challenges in your area. Again, you're rowing upstream with that opioid problem. You're going to be expecting probably a really strong flow with COVID over the next year or so. And so be prepared for bad numbers, but also be prepared to use that, I think, as an opportunity to know where you need to focus your efforts, or to know what's kind of important for you to move forward on. So yeah, so any questions about the health indicators overall? All right, so the last area that we kind of highlighted was around economic development. And again, I would say in general, the numbers aren't great here. There's a lot of challenges that you're facing. And a lot of these challenges are intermingled with other things. And so a lot of the challenges are, around economic development, have to do with the lack of a business or the shrinking business base. In fact, they have to do with exit migration, and exit migration probably contributes to a decreasing employment base. And so there are some bright spots here and there, but it's definitely an area of concern. And so we'll look at household wealth, employment activity, job opportunities, and a few other things. So this is a chart of kind of the median, the middle of the road household income across the United States and West Virginia, the 6-county area. And so as you can see, and as kind of probably expected, in general, as the cost of living increases, the average income for the United States is steadily increasing. So, and West Virginia and the 6-county area has always been below the national average, but the findings on this are incredibly flat, really. If you look at 2014 and 2020, you have basically the exact same numbers that you were looking at. There hasn't been any change in household income over the last 7 years. And so people are making the same thing they were 7 years ago. And that's it's good as not shrinking, but you're definitely not keeping pace with the national average, not keeping pace with inflation. So in terms of real dollars, household income is probably shrinking over time as people try to get by with the same amount of money in a more expensive economy. You can see here there were some real differences in your local county areas. The lowest was, again, Clay County, where the average household income was only about $34,000. But and that's quite a ways away from the $59,000, $60,000 average of the United States. But you also kind of see this across the board. Fayette, Kanawha, Lincoln all had depressed household incomes. Only Putnam probably was higher than everybody else, which again, I don't think you're going to find terribly surprising. So the next two graphs, I think we kind of have to look at the same time. So this is a chart of what percentage of adults, working age adults, are actually gainfully employed, at least on the books, right? So what percentage of your eligible workforce is participating in paid work? And so that number is pretty much consistent across the board. It has seen some dips nationally in 2020, and probably we'll see a bigger dip in 2021 numbers due to COVID as all of the businesses shut down during the closures. But these numbers, again, are very, very stagnant here and are not really promising. So the state has slightly more than 50% of eligible persons working. But your 6-county catchment area has somewhere in the low 40s, mid 40% of your population working. And so who's not working? That can include, persons who are disabled, persons who maybe took an early retirement, persons who are homemakers, but probably consists of a lot of chronically unemployed people. People who couldn't get a job and for one reason or another has kind of given up trying to get a job, and that chronically long-term unemployed. And so are getting by operating in kind of the gray or dark economy and things off the book where they're not actually earning paid wages and paying tax or other things, or they may be getting by on subsidies, food stamps, disability and other kinds of that. So there's it is pretty dramatic, the difference between how much of your population is working as compared to the national average. So almost a 20% difference between that and the national average. And again, numbers here are not equally divided. Boone County has 34%. 2/3 of their population, working age population, is not working. Only about 1/3 of the people are, and it's not much better in Fayette. So you can kind of see how that plays out. So then the other two numbers that kind of keep in mind at the same time are unemployment. And so unemployment obviously has been on a steady decline and then a steep increase here in 2020 overall because of the impacts of COVID. But unemployment has always been higher in the 6-county area and in West Virginia than it has been nationally. that disparity has grown over time. And as you can see here in 2018, 2019, there was a pretty significant difference between the unemployment rate nationally and what you guys had locally. I think because of that, you already had a lot of people unemployed and there weren't a lot of extra jobs laying around, you didn't see as much of a spike in 2020 as other people did because everybody was already unemployed, right? And or they've given up participating in the workforce, so they're not counted in this unemployment number. Only the people actively looking for employment would be listed in these numbers here. And then the final number, and again, I guess I'll just say that here you can see that unemployment again is not evenly distributed across the counties. But I think what brings us all home is this last set of graphs. And that really is the number of employees, and we can consider this really the opportunities for employment, right? So as you can see on the national graph here, the number of employees across the United States is steadily increasing every year, in line with kind of population growth, right? So the more people we have, the more people we have employed, the bigger the economy. And you can see that is not the case for West Virginia. That is not the case for the 6-county area, but both have actually seen a small decline in the number of jobs that are available. So your employment base is shrinking over time. There are less jobs available in West Virginia and less jobs available in your 6-county area than there were last year or the year before or the year before or the year before, all the way back to 2013. So there's less opportunities available. Again, there's not evenly distributed here. Kanawha experienced the greatest decrease in the number of employees during this time, probably because of COVID having the biggest impact in your community in Kanawha than it did in some of the other counties. So the last indicator I wanted to just share with you is about the number of new business startups. And we might think of this as a proxy for entrepreneurship. And so this might be one way that, West Virginia might find its way out of this decreasing employment basis through supporting entrepreneurships, new businesses, startups, the gig economy, for lack of a better term, and other things. And so that has actually seen an increase over the last few years in terms of the number of new business startups, both at the state level and at the local level. And so that is somewhat of a bright spot and maybe a place where you can take some comfort or find some opportunities to kind of encourage those activities. So I'll pause again for a second before I get to kind of the big discussion overarching points and see if anyone had any specific questions about kind of those economic development outcomes. Okay. So then I really have two major points of discussion that I wanted to just highlight for your consideration. And the first really is kind of the disparity within your 6-county catchment area. And so as you probably have kind of caught on to by now, Clay County and Lincoln counties were kind of always at the bottom of these rankings. And you can see here that Clay County, again, had half of the number of people who have some post-secondary education as compared to the national average. Clay County's rate of broadband access was dramatically lower than the 6 catchment area. We're talking 30% versus 90%. Premature mortality in Lincoln County was the highest. The highest rates of food insecurity were in Clay County and Lincoln County. The lowest median household income was in Clay County. Lincoln was really close to that as well. And Clay County had the highest unemployment rate, and Lincoln had the second highest unemployment rate. So you can see that those two counties really have the higher need than some of your other areas. So that is just put out there for your consideration. And then the other thing I just wanted to bring up, because I think it intertwines with so many of the other indicators here, is really this trend of exit migration, right? And so if education is the path out of poverty, and you guys are doing an outstanding job and have been for a while of getting people to get their high school diploma, how and why is that not that accomplishment is not really being seen in the other indicators? It's not being seen in the percentage of adults who have post-secondary education. It's not being seen by increases in employment rates and household income and the other factors where you think it might be seen. And so when we look at the actual demographic information for your community, what you'll see is that the percentage of population that's in that working age range is actually shrinking. And concurrently, then the elderly population and even the young population tend to increase, but that working age population tends to decrease. And so what you can assume is happening, and we can actually document that this is even at a higher rate for people who have some kind of post-secondary education, is that people tend to move out of the area for jobs, right? They may move out of the area for an education and never come back, or they may get an education and then seek employment elsewhere. There is some indication, and this actually comes through some other work that we've done with the foundation, I think on scholarships, that there is interest in people who get scholarships and have moved out of the area that at some point they would like to move back into the area if the opportunity allows. And so if you could create, the jobs or the situation, the environment that could support people working, I think they would likely, a good percentage of people might move back into your place. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. I don't think you're going to have necessarily a solution to solve that problem, but you've got to remember that definitely influences everything that you're doing. And so that's kind of the two big points. And I want to stop there and just see if you have questions about any of this specifically or in general. So.
Hey, Matt, this is Sean Mayberry. You hear me?
I can.
Yeah, my question, first of all, thank you. Very eye-opening and really nice presentation. I know you said not to get into the weeds, but do you have more granular data? What I'm concerned with is really the neighborhood level. And when you start thinking about the counties and you point out, Clay County and, tend to be at the bottom, I think, perhaps that's missing the disparity between, the haves and the have-nots, or the healthy and the unhealthy. When I think about, perhaps the poorest in Putnam County, some Putnam County neighborhoods may be equally or perhaps worse off than those in Clay County, and the same, with health and everything else. So just a thought whether or not that data is available, and how we could have some discussion around that, so that we, we're strategically thinking correctly.
So my answer to that is yes and no. And so there's going to be a lot of information that we would like to know that will not be available necessarily even at the county level. But what we can get at the county level, I would say 80% of the time, we can't get at any more granular level than that, at least not from these third-party data sources. However, having said that, there are opportunities, particularly, and that will become particularly even more accessible over the next year or two. As the census was just done, we're going to have a brand new level of census that we can actually drill down to the census tract level, which is smaller than it's not always smaller than the zip code. It depends on the area. It's based on population and natural geographic boundaries. And so sometimes census tracts are huge, like in Alaska, but I don't think that's the case. So we could do some additional drill down on some of the indicators that you care about based on that census data. But a lot of that information will not necessarily be available at the more granular level, at least not from the national third-party data sources. That doesn't mean that if we were particularly interested in, say, Putnam County and wanting to do a deeper dive on Putnam County and really pull out, the haves and have-nots and to map that out, that couldn't be done. It just couldn't be done as easily as, pulling these 60 or 70 indicators together. And when we put out the final version of this full report, it will have the data tables for each county for each year, so that you at least be able to see that level of detail. So I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did, and I appreciate it. And I think we can exercise good judgment and experience and observation to work through that. But I just want us all to be conscious of that, because I think sometimes just broad stroking each county, I think sometimes we're missing some things.
No, I would.
Or we could potentially miss some things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think. Well, some of this might be a little bit shocking, or you hadn't thought about it. My my guess would be, I would expect that you probably understand what this means in your local communities and can see the picture. And so definitely, yeah, if you know these are issues, you're going to know the areas that are hardest hit and the areas that are not, and where those places are. And so I think if anything, this should bolster your kind of intuition about those things, that these are really important things regardless of what the data says. It just supports the fact that these things are important and the trends are heading in the wrong direction in certain communities. And so you'll probably know best how to respond to that, with or without the data. So
Terrific. Thank you.
mm-hmm. Other questions about the report or anything in the report before I think Thomas is going to lead a larger discussion, if I'm correct, if I looked at the agenda, about some of these issues. But
Could you stop screen sharing, please, Matt?
definitely will.
Yeah, and so I'm not sure I can open up the conversation here to talk about anything else we've had. You know, our goal was to capture your analysis of what you were hearing in that document. There's some really good analysis coming out of that, and we were going to dive deeper into this that first day of the retreat in November. But let me just open it up for discussion and see if there's any things that you want to tease out now. Any other questions for Matt or anything else that would be helpful? Will? You're on mute. Actually, you got one of your things on mute there. Still on mute. There you go.
Got it. Sorry about that. I think one piece that I didn't hear you all speak of, and it really relates to the economic development and the economic circumstances we find ourselves in, is the external environment of a once in a half-century flow of resources, federal funding resources into our areas. And I am involved in a private development in Boone County that will be more successful if there is broad-based community development activity going on in Boone County. And I see how understaffed, underprepared, overwhelmed the people who are best positioned to apply for and benefit from these funding sources. And I think that there's a real risk that we won't make the most of those funding sources as they come through. And the converse is a lot of the pieces are in place, and a couple of more ounces of strategic core support that is not project-based but is capacity building based could have a huge ripple effect because of the next 3 to 4 years of major dollars flowing into our areas.
You know, I'll give a quick response to this question because it's something we think about a lot. You know, we work across the region and manage a couple of larger networks who are dealing with all these things. It's just a weird time. Nonprofits and even at the county level government and things, you know, have been so stretched over the last year or so burnt out with all the challenges that they've had to do, and we've got all this money coming in at the same time. It's a challenging period of time. What's happening in a lot of places, small grants that go to really helping somebody to get a grant writer so they can, you know, immediate boost to their capacity to be able to write a federal grant. Facilitation support on some of the planning that's needed around multi-county, multi-stakeholder grants. And so, you know, there's a lot of that kind of stuff happening in the region. I know Benedum, I know Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation is thinking about a lot of that work. And there's a lot of proposals coming from West Virginia into those EDA grants and other things that we see. Coalfield Development, I know, is doing some big work there around workforce development and so on and so forth. So, but I'm not sure specifically, you know, Greater Kanawha Valley staff, are y'all involved in any of that sort of immediate capacity building to help federal funds? What's working for y'all? because it's an issue all across the region, and I think a lot of people share your same concern, Will.
And we are not currently working in accessing those funds for our grantees. We do have a capacity building budget where we support our grantees in a number of ways. It's something that we just recently have been is to see if the board would like us to apply for some of the AR, like the state level, the city and county level ARP funds. We haven't had the chance to ask our board about that, but currently we are not accessing any of those funds. But we do have a budget within our admin, but line within our admin budget, where we provide a number of capacity building opportunities like our Leadership Institute and so on.
Michelle, would we apply for those funds, or would we maybe host a workshop or something like that to help our organizations apply for those funds on their own?
We're not doing anything right now, but I think we have
Okay.
talked about possibly doing, asking the board if they would like us to do, if you guys would like us to do that. But we can do either or. Yeah. In terms of, because there's some city level funding that's available that we can potentially help support our nonprofits with. We haven't made any moves or anything as yet, but it could be either or.
It also could be both. I think that because I've had to look into this for business reasons, and I see good partners in the Boone County area and talk with them about these sources of funds that a private business can't apply to, but they can, and they say, oh my God, we just don't have the capacity to begin thinking about this. I think there are many organizations that are hosting workshops on be aware of these funds. Here are the rules, here's how you apply. That is not, and I think the biggest gap that I see is just people just don't have the capacity to write the grants, to do the network organizing. There's an appropriate expectation that there be coordination and collaboration across different institutions in a local area. And the planning grant for these grants is $500,000. Okay, so that tells you the size that it takes to even be applying for this. And a group like that we fund, Coal River Group, they're an example of a group that has remarkable, broad-based economic impact in a 2 watersheds, but they don't begin to have those kinds of resources to figure out how to tap into and make offers to Brandon Denison or make offers to the Community Development Hub. There's a gap between the state level work and the local level doers. Coal River Group is an example, much like there's limited capacity at the state level to do the national. So I think I'm observing room in both, and across the board, there's not a lot of a nexus to private employers. So that's another, in my mind, gap that I'm seeing, and investing philanthropically and trying to understand those gaps. But I think we could apply some of what we're learning to have an impact in our 6 county area, because we have lots of money flowing in and it's very easy to spend it poorly.
And just a couple of resources. The Just Transition Fund, which grew out of the Appalachia Funders Network, which Great Kanawha Valley Foundation is a part of. Michelle's on the steering committee, co-chair of the steering committee. Just Transition Fund has small mini grants that can get to the ground. They're also doing some very deep training on the EBA type grants, the Build Back Better grants. That could be a potential resource. I just saw that the Hub, West Virginia Hub and Benetton Foundation are pulling together folks who are doing the power proposals for the Appalachia Regional Commission. I'm not sure that they have resources, but they're pulling the folks together, either who have a power grant or who are trying to apply for one. But then the Appalachia Regional Commission actually, by Ms. Manchin, pulled together some sector conversations around local food, around heritage-based tourism that ran across the region a few weeks ago, trying to get in some better, some of those Build Back Better proposals. And then the local development district also have some support from the Appalachia Regional Commission to be able to help foster some bigger proposals as well. A few resources out there, but I would agree, well, getting those to the ground with the grassroots groups is always, or the more grassroots you get, the further you get away from any of those resources. And while they may be out there, there's still not enough, I think. This may be a question, and I'm not looking at the sheet right now, but it's a good question to get on the list of what can, what can or should the Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation, what role should you play in any of this? Because a lot of that money is coming down this fall, but there's going to be more and more of that money coming down next year and throughout the, the coming next couple of years. And so this could be a deeper dive in our retreat to figure out what the right role is, the right role might be, and how best to do some of that work within the counties that you serve.
And Susan, maybe we can discuss at our next executive committee meeting. We could discuss. Yeah.
Sure. I think maybe we also need to take a look at is our jobs a basic need that people need here. I mean, I know that we typically have always said that it's health, education, arts, housing, but when I look at these numbers, I think that we need to sort of maybe think about jobs as basic needs too.
And Susan, I 100% agree with you. It's like if you look at all the other statistics, if you can provide a job, you can improve every single one of them. And I don't know what in the world we can do to push that along, but I think it's a thought worth magnifying and see where we might go with it.
I think, I don't know, when I see these numbers, that gives me real pause for concern. So I think that that's something we're really going to need to take a look at in November, is what can we do to help with job development?
Yeah, the one question that Matt put out there too is, high school graduation rates are rising. Where's the bridge from high school to somewhere else, right? And it seems like there's some missing piece in there. This notion of jobs, I would agree. I think it's part of what's happened to our whole region. Once you lose your job or you don't have access to a job, lots of other things begin to tumble down the wrong road. You lose your dignity, you lose your vision, lose your pride. Who cares if I'm doing drugs? I mean, that's the easiest thing to do. We've seen it, seen it in my hometown. We see it all across the region. I like the framework that the East Tennessee, ETSU, East Tennessee State University, the Public Health Department always talks about the three-legged stool. It's three-legged stool. It's education, economic development, and health, and they all three go together, right? And there's a really interesting way to think about. Y'all are doing work in all of those areas and really thinking about those three things happen simultaneously. But I would agree, the jobs piece, if that piece is missing, the other two are going to continue to go down. Great fodder for our conversation in November, I think.
This is Bob again. It seems to me we've always had economic development on our plate, but we've struggled with ways to influence that area, I think, and even struggled with who to give the money to sometimes. Is that fair, Stephanie? It seems like it's always a challenge.
Yeah, and I would maybe volley over to Todd, and I know Dickinson is active on this task group, but we've explored at one point grants to entities like Robert C. Byrd Institute, which was doing business incubation. And at one point, the task group struggled with, if our grant making were to benefit a private entity, that was problematic. And so then we've tried a softer approach to community economic development and looked at placemaking and outdoor recreation as forms of community economic development. But, you know, I know also Michelle was active in getting us to that priority area. So that's my 2 cents, but I'm sure there's more to say about that.
Yeah, we've also funded workforce development programs. So I think that you know, where we would, like with the, well, what is it? The Goodwill program, the West Virginia Women's Work programs. So those are workforce development programs that are hopefully leading in the, you know, towards jobs that can be acquired and sustained. So
We've funded the nurse practitioner group too. I'm not sure how successful they've been.
They've been very successful in terms of being able to secure huge federal funding just recently. So it's like we provided them with funding in their early years, and now they have gone on to secure, how many? Is it 500,000, Todd, or more?
1.3 million.
Like 2 big grants totaling 1.3 million.
And 10 jobs within 3 years. Employers, nurses, businesses that are up and running. Over 10 jobs, over 10 new jobs. I want to go back to something, and I kind of the address or mention something that I think Will Carter mentioned it earlier regarding Coal River Group and organizations and capacity. I think that there's some real truth to that. There's some capacity issues that we have not been able to make the leap with our organizations and some of those organizations that are out there doing great work, but trying to get them to the next level where they can go out and secure, just as you just said, Michelle, about Future of Nursing securing, they got Future of Nursing just secured a I think it was a $500,000 EDA grant and a $630,000 ARC grant, if I'm not mistaken, and it's some other grants, about 1.3 in total within the last 12 months. That's huge. It's a small organization, and while they are very efficient with what they do with those jobs, I think there are some capacity issues that will still sort of stymie the potential for real growth. It's like we haven't learned some kind of history, or for lack of learning from history. I referenced TVA, what happened to the TVA between the 30s and the 50s. You know, that was a project that was heralded as this end all to economic development in Appalachia. And, you know, it ended up being, we're just now digging out from it, and they're doing some great things. But the TVA from the 30s is a great example of how we're not necessarily taking it to the next level, how we haven't learned from our mistakes. Pandering, the autonomy between coal and the chemical industry here, you know, we've made some missteps. And when your communities are sort of starved and hungry, it takes that disparity sort of overwhelms, and we sort of end up grabbing at the first thing that comes along instead of staying the course and building on a framework and staying on a path. So I think the real where real solutions are being made. I think we have to foster, dig in and say, this is what we're going to do, and stick to it.
Well, this is going to be a great conversation, I think, in November. And I think there's a lot of great, thank you so much for the analysis and the questions and thoughts that you put in the Google Doc there. I do think this is a huge issue. It's a huge issue all across the region. Our economy has been in a transition for a long time, and the Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation has lots of roles to play and lots of tools. You know, the question I would also come in November is what is your leadership role in all of this? I mean, we talked several years ago. I remember we had that, it was kind of a small meeting with a bunch of very influential people. And one of the things that came out of that was there has to be political will to really diversify the economy and to really begin to think about more of these promising sectors in healthcare, food, and clean energy and tourism. And is that leadership in place? What role does the foundation have to play in some of that? How do you foster those bigger, deeper plans that Todd is talking about that you actually work on in partnership for a long time? There's probably a lot of that in motion now. Does the foundation have any roles beyond grant making would be a question to really think about as we move into the November strategic plan. I'm recognizing we're out of time as well. So Michelle, I'll kick it back to you, or maybe Bob, do you have another comment there? Sorry, I saw your.
Yeah, just real quickly, is there any problem with sharing this information, this document? It's quite wonderful information. I just wonder if there's any concerns there.
I think, do we still have a bit of editing to do? And maybe we'll send it out when it's final, but sure, we usually post it online. So it's, yeah, we'll finalize some things, and yes, you're free to share it, Bob. And one thing I was thinking of as we wrap, in November, we were still on the fence about in person or virtual. What does the body think? Should we try to do in person with masks? Because I really dread having to do this virtually. What are y'all thinking? Could we do in person in our large conference room with everyone masked? Is that?
I think that we need to try to do it in person. I understand that some people might have might not be able to, but I think as many people as we could have in person would be better, because it just fosters the discussion so much better.
I personally won't be able to be there in person for family reasons. So I would beg that we try to get our technology in such a condition as to be able to have a hybrid meeting, if at all possible.
Okay. Yeah, we've been working on our technology, so by then you should have it top notch. Fingers and toes crossed. All righty. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in and for conversation. Really excited about our new strategic plan and what it'll mean for our community. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a good rest.